All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. We got every seat filled tonight, which is amazing. I don't know if we could fit more people in the shop tonight. We probably could. There's some space over there. We can tuck them behind the wall and they can just drink in quiet and peace. But we're really excited. Tasting number 175 of the Saratoga Whiskey Club. We keep rolling along here. Earlier this year, in January, Holly and I, during our quiet season, we like to go visit distilleries that we haven't been to. We decided to take a trip down to Ohio and Indiana and a tiny bit of Kentucky. And one of our main reasons for going there was to visit Starlight, which we'll be tasting tonight. We had an incredible time there, a full afternoon at Starlight. Spent so much time that we couldn't even get to the ice cream parlor next door, but we're always going to hold that over Andrew's head.
Promises were made, promises were not kept.
Yes, promises were made, and it didn't happen, but it's all good. We found a really great barrel. We're excited to share it with you guys tonight. But we're super excited that Andrew's here. He's really out of his area in upstate New York. I don't know if you've ever been up this way before.
Never been this far.
All right,
nope.
So there you go. We're taking him out of the Indiana hood and bringing him to our hood. But while we were at Starlight, we did a little tour, learned about the history. Andrew will talk all about that. Andrew Jerdonek is the spirits master at Starlight, basically. He's the one in charge of all of the barrels, all of the programs that go on, visits people, represents Starlight in many facets. But and he's with Sarah. Sarah's part of the Skurnik family here. Sarah's been great to us with bringing all these wonderful new spirits from their portfolio to us. So without further ado, we're going to let Andrew come up here. We have a tasting mat that goes from bottom left to right and then back left to right. However, Andrew might decide to shake it up. I don't know. We'll see. He'll take a look at it.
We're going to stay in order.
All right. We're gonna stay in order. It's fair game. But yeah, so any questions, just go ahead and ask and we'll just get started. We do, at one point, we're going to stop. I'm going to flip my screen around, just show you a couple of photos from our trip, a couple of short videos of the warehouse. We'll share that online with the people that are online. We have a pretty big group online tonight. So about almost 50 in total, both in the shop and online. So really solid outing tonight. So, all right, Andrew, floor is yours. Excellent. If you want to stand right here, yeah, you're good to go.
Well, hello, guys. Thank you for having me. A big thank you to Holly, Charles, Sarah, everybody for putting this together. Again, I don't often get up into northern New York, so this is definitely out of my wheelhouse. I do see a Louisville Cardinal back there. I see some IU, so it's kind of nice to see that back there. But yeah, guys, so a little bit about me. My name's Andrew Jerdonek. I'm the spirits director at Starlight Distillery. I wish my title was Spirit Master. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up a bit later. But yeah, so basically my role is to oversee all of the spirits production. So we are a 3 still operation. I'll kind of get into all that here in a little bit. But 3 stills means a lot of barrels turning out for a craft distillery. So you kind of have to keep your eye on all of them, seeing where we're going. So my main facilitation is to get single barrel bourbons in bulk to great clients like First Fill. And again, we'll get into their selection, but also to maintain all of our core items and kind of the things that people don't really talk about as much, like vodka, gin, rum, single malts, things like that. So it's a very, very fun job. It's been very, very fast. We've been expanding rapidly, especially up in this market. So it's awesome to see, a little bit of Starlight, a little bit of Indiana bourbon going along there. So I like to run these things super casually. We don't need to have it so formal here. So if anybody has questions along the way, just let me know. I'll be happy to kind of talk, have a little Q&A along the way here. But there's nothing worse than having whiskey in front of you and listening to a stranger talk with it tinting you right there. So we're going to start with the first one. And when we start with that first, then I'll get into a little bit of background, a little bit of family history about our farm. So the first one you're going to see in the bottom left is going to be the double oaked rye whiskey. So our mash bill for single barrel ryes is going to be a split between two different variations. So we have a 90 rye, 10% malted barley. We also have an 80% rye, 20% malted barley. Those are our two mash bills. But for something like the double oaked rye, it's a blend of both. So there's going to be multiple different mash bills in them. It doesn't really have an exact science on how much of one versus how much the other is. It's all about what the blend tastes like when we do it. We're not interested in a set formula. We are interested in what tastes the best when we do it. So we are a grain to glass facility here at the farm. So what that means is that a lot of times people are putting grain to glass on their bottle, farm to glass on their bottle, sustainability on there. But what does that really mean? You know, technically all distilleries are grain to glass because the grain is eventually going to end up in your glass. But for us, we are an 800-acre farm, and we're about to celebrate our 182nd harvest up there. So we've been a family-owned farm since 1843, and all the crops that are grown on the farm is 100% utilized for things on the farm. So, for example, we grow everything grain-wise between corn, wheat, and rye. We do not grow barley. Barley does not grow very well in Indiana. So those are the three grains that we grow for our spirits. And as far as the fruits go, we grow multiple different variations. But for example, the big ones, peach, blackberry, strawberries, black raspberries, different things like that. All of those are going to be utilized for both the winery and the distillery for brandies. And then also things like the ice cream shop, things like the farmer's market, different variations like that. So for this specific product, we are growing a winter style rye. Right now it's in the ground as we speak, and it should start blooming up here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We'll be harvesting it in around May time. So the first thing to harvest on our farm and the first thing that grows up is going to be strawberries and rye. And it's typically about 2 weeks into May. These ones are used for multiple different cooperages. So we actually have 7 different cooperages that we partner with in the United States. Some of the big ones are going to be Spirit of Canton, Kelvin Cooperage, Independent Stave Company. Some of the lesser known ones, Zach Cooperage down in Boston, Kentucky, Barrel Mill, Great West Virginia Barrel Company, and then also Sagu Monroe out of Napa, California. So we have a very wide variations of barrels that to deliver a very, very different approach to it. So the ones that you're going to have, this is 4.5 years old at 106 proof. This was primarily done with the Spirit of Canton cask and also the Kelvin Cooperage cask. So go ahead and dive into that first one.
Take a step back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that you're going to start getting with this rye is, you know, the stereotypical rye is, you know, big spice, eucalyptus, dill, you know, spearmint, peppermint, bubblegum sometimes. That's not Starlight Distillery's rye. So we make a very specific style of rye, and it's almost like a bourbon drinker's rye. You're talking about a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of caramel, those rich baking spices, but also a little bit of that orange zest in there. It has a citrus undertone to it. So by using that double oak, by going through there, and I'll explain what double oak means to Starlight Distillery, because double oak has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different distilleries. That allows it to enhance that flavor, take it to the next level, where it might just kind of fall flat. That double oaked and that second barrel kind of launches it into the next world here. So this barrel is labeled as American oak. So that means that 100% of the barrels that went into there, both the first barrel and the second barrel, were all charred American oak. You'll see here in a little bit that we get a little squirrely, start venturing into the French oaks, things like that, and that derives a completely different palate. But for these, the second barrel that we used were 100% first fill, first use American oak to really hone in on that kind of vanilla, caramel, and a little bit more of that eccentric citrus flavor to it. So what do you guys think about the first one? It's a nice little palate warm up on there. It's kind of nice to get it going. It's a little, we're going to be going into a slightly lesser proof one on the next one. But while you guys are getting into that, just a little bit of farm history about us here. So again, like I said, we have been a family-owned farm since 1843. Our originator, Simon Carl, in the first generation came over from Baden, Germany back in I guess he would have landed here in the 30s. And we acquired our farm in the early 40s in the 1800s. So we had always been fruit farmers. And eventually we tried our hand in the dairy farming business. I'll give you a spoiler, it did not work. So we went quickly back over to fruit farming. So we'd always been grape and strawberry farmers from the get-go. As time kind of progressed, we ended up into the winery business. So we started with the U-pick on our farm in the 70s. The U-pick was kind of a not known thing to monetize you picking, because if you really think about it, you're allowing people to come to your property and do your work, and then they pay you. So it's kind of a weird concept, but that actually ended up blowing up. So in 1970, we implemented that U-Pick program. And then after that, in 1978, that's when the winery went legitimate. We have always been distillers and winemakers, but a lot of times that could have been, under the table, a little bit of moonshine in the back. So now it's now legitimized. So we started it in 1976 and went legitimate in 1978. Then from there, as we fast forward, we started putting that on the map, making more sweet wines. We are in Southern Indiana where we're based at. So sweet wines are king, but we do have a lot of different Napa varietals, Bordeaux varietals, and also German varietals of grapes for some really great dry reds and dry whites. So fast forward again, 1995, our current owner and operator in the 6th generation, Ted Huber, became CEO and president of the farm. He basically was just handed the keys from his dad and said, good luck. So he was 25 years old. By 1998, we decided that we were going to trademark Starlight Distillery, and that's where really we started getting this ball rolling. I'll go a little bit more in depth when we get into the bourbon about how we got to that point, because it's a tragic story that ended very, very good in perseverance for our distillery. But in 1998, we trademarked Starlight Distillery. By 2001, we were able to acquire our 82-gallon copper pot still. We had the majority of the parts, but then 9/11 happened. Shut down all the import and export, and basically the remaining part of our column on our still was just resting up north. So we just drove up and got it, loaded it in a car, drove all the way back down to Indiana, and we called the company. The company is the Carl family over in Germany, where the still came from. We said, hey, listen, we got all of our parts. We're excited, ready to rock and roll. When can you guys be here? And they said, oh, we're not coming. So now we're left with all these parts. So as farmers, perseverance, we built it ourselves. So it's probably not OSHA approved, but we got it done. So we built that, and by 2002, that's when we were able to first launch our first round of actual brandy on there. So from 2001, technically, up until 2012, Indiana granted us the ability to do fruit-based distillation, because we were already a winery. It was illegal to actually do grain-based distillation for a craft distillery. So we were doing ports and we were doing different styles of brandies. We do a cognac style, which is a double distilled brandy. The brandies that we offer are grape brandy, which is traditional, apple brandy, which is on the docket, and formerly pear brandy. We don't grow pears anymore. We replace them more with peaches. So we do a peach brandy too. So up until 2012, we were distilling all of those things. Then we actually helped rewrite the laws and legislation in the state of Indiana. So by 2013, they granted us the ability to do grain-based spirits. That's when the bourbon boom really, really took off for us. So from 2013 to 2015, this little 82-gallon still was responsible for bourbon, rye, vodka, gin, port, grappa, brandy. You think it was running it on there. It was an absolute workhorse. So that progressed up until 2015. And if you do the math on there for bourbon, 2013 to 2015, 2 years. That means that our first copper pot still bourbon, which was Carl T Signature Bourbon, which is our flagship bourbon to this day, that was the first one we were able to release in 2015. And that is when the bourbon boom really took off. Gas on the fire. We ended up acquiring a 500-gallon Vendome pot still, and we started taking production through the roof. So where we were doing double-digit barrels, now we're starting to push into high triple digits and low quadruple digits for barrels. So that was the same all the way up until 2024. Last year on January 9th, we were able to commission our 40-foot split continuous column still, and now we're really cooking. So now it's taking it to the next level. To put it in perspective, first off, I guess I should say, do you all know what the difference between pot distillation and column distillation is? It's pretty self-explanatory for it. So with pot distillation, if we have 6,000 gallons of fermented mash that we need to go and ferment it down and then distill, on that pot still, it'll take us about 3 weeks to get through everything start to finish on that 500 gallon. When we run that on the continuous column still, depending how long my head distiller takes at lunch, 9 hours. So the production time is cut down tremendously. So now we're talking for about 950 barrels a year to about 10 or 11,000. So that's assuming that we're going to whip the horse as hard as we can with that still, which we are not going to, because the thing is again, we are a grain to glass facility. So we have to make sure that we're spreading out the grains as they are harvested, as they grow the whole 9 yards. So if we did it as quickly as we can, our distillation year would be over at about April 1. So we want to make sure that we're spreading the love a little bit here. But if you guys are ready to move on to number 2, does anybody have any questions right now?
What is there a specific level of char that you're using in the barrels?
That's the fun part about Starlight Distillery. Throw a dart on the board. So the thing is like, let's pick on Knob Creek. You go to Knob Creek. Knob Creek exclusively use Independent State Company char number 3. We'll pick on ISC because we're here. In ISC will do ISC char 1, 2, 3, 4 in a craft distiller's char, which is a 5, or an alligator char, if you can talk about it that way. Toasted head, charred head, air seasoned wood between 12 months, 24, 36, 48, or 60 month. The variations are endless for us. So that's what we find very interesting about Starlight Distillery, is that there is consistency in the quality, but there's inconsistency in the consistency, if that makes sense. So the thing is that one time, one of my good buddies, who's a barrel picker down in Indiana, he went and picked this barrel, and it was outstanding. One of the best barrels, in my opinion, that has ever come out of Starlight. Came back 2 years later and said, I have to pick that same barrel again. Can we look at the stats? I said, brother, that is not how it works at Starlight. So the thing is that you will always find a diamond in there, but they're all so uniquely different. One thing that I love to do, and I'm sure that we did it with Holly and Charles, is that on paper, I can have 2 barrels that are right next to each other. They were filled on the same day, aged on the same day, harvested on the same day. The wood on paper is exactly the same, down to the toast and the char, all 9 yards, and they can be night and day different. That is just bourbon. That's what gets us excited about bourbon, is the inconsistency on the consistency. So it's very, very fun to see all that. So more of the stories within those 7 different cooperages, we have the full spread across the board. So that's the fun thing, is when you come in and pick a barrel with me at Starlight, again, they can be a testament to this. The very, very first question I will ask you after the first sip hits your lips and you get a good front palate, back palate, good nose on it, good finish, what do you not like about it? What is it not doing for you? What is it doing you wish it wasn't? Or what is it doing, or what is it not doing that you wish it was? And the reason for that is when you go to many different places like the big boys will roll out 3 barrels for you and you get to taste them. Shame on them. How am I supposed to know what your all's palates are? You know what I mean? So with this, we go in there, and when I ask you, what do you not like about it? At any point, I have about 2,000 barrels to go through. We're not going to go through all of them. Maybe close, but not all of them. And so by being that honest, candid feedback about what you don't like about it, what the barrel's doing that you wish it wasn't, I can start narrowing that gap more and more and more to where we can exactly fine tune your palate and your profile. And that, with all the char levels, toast levels, that is how I'm able to do that. So it's a very, very fun process. But
we tasted 11 barrels.
Only 11? Wow, short day.
Well, we were trying to get to ice cream.
I know, to think we still didn't make it to ice cream. Yeah, they came in at a very strange time, and I felt bad because it's like how hokey and country do we look? We were cleaning the carpets that day, so we had to move all of the furniture into our literal wine retail area. So we're literally like sipping Armagnac finish and honey finish and all this stuff, and like there's like children next to us eating flatbreads right next to the cab sab, and I'm like, this is not the most ideal day to be here, but we're gonna make it happen.
It was a beautiful day.
Yeah, it was a fun day. It was a very, very fun day. So, any other questions?
Yeah, based on those variations in barrels and everything you mentioned, do you release in batches or?
So yes and no. So essentially what we do is we do batches, but we don't do batches specific to the barrel type, meaning that we're not going to go through and we're not going to say, here's 20 Kelvin Char 3s. Let's make a Kelvin Char 3 batch. We are only interested in what tastes the absolute best. So what we do is we will pick out, it depends on how big the batch is. If this was 4 years ago, a batch to us would be 4 barrels. Nowadays, it's like between 20 and 50, depending on what we're trying to achieve. And we will pick out on paper what should be the best ones, just based on the specs. The ones that are going to blend the best together, the ones that were done closest in the distillation season, things like that. Then once that blend is made, we let it oxidize for a day or two in stainless steel, which is neutral. And from that point, that's when we say, what is it missing? Is this way too flat? Does it need more spice to it? Does it need more oak? Is it way too oaky? Do we need to bring it down a notch? Kind of buff it out with some more soft and elegant whiskey? So we will make that adjustment as we go. So the one thing that we've always said from day one is that we're not interested in making the best whiskey. We're interested in making the best whiskey for that day. We don't let yesterday's distillation run dictate what we do today, and we're not going to let today dictate what we do tomorrow. So we're only interested in what is the best one for us. So for those batches, correct, we will do batches, but maybe we do all Kelvin barrels and we say, gosh, there's something missing in there. And maybe what's missing is the Spirit of Canton barrel. They kind of bring it up. So there will be batches, correct?
Yeah, I guess what I was wondering though, from that though, do you number the batch on your bottle? So I absolutely love this number 47, so I find another one. Or do you
Way to tee me up, because that's a great thing to move on to sample number 2, because me and him playing this before we came here. So
He knows nothing about teas.
yeah. So if you go to the next pour that's going to be directly to your right is going to be our bottle in bond. Okay. Bottle in bond is batched. Beforehand, we did have barrel numbers and batch numbers, but it was very inconsistent. Really, it had nothing to do with the consumer. It had everything to do with us as the producer. That was strictly just so we could have a log of where we were going, what we did, how we did it, things like that. So what you'll notice is if you look, which you all can't see it probably very well because it's small, it literally will say batch number 0001 on the bottle. That is how we are doing it moving forward. In old bottles, which not our problem right now because all the old bottles are gone, it will say B250. I mean, that doesn't mean a damn thing to anybody. You know what I mean? That's just random numbers. That was for us, for our internal system. Now we're understanding that we're starting to get that big following, and batch numbers are 100% something that people need to have. So single barrels will render barrel numbers. Batches will now move forward with the batch 001, 002, and so on and so forth. Now, this is our bottled in bond. This is our award-winning one. We actually got Craft Distillery of the Year for this bottle last year through the Ascot Award. This one is proofed at 100 proof and is 4 years old. Now, I'm sure we all know it, but are we familiar with the terminology of bottle and bond? It's a pretty common term these days. Bottle and bond was enacted back in 1897 with the Bottle and Bond Act. One thing that I always like to point out there is most people have heard this terminology, but not a whole lot of people understand what it actually is about. So how many people have heard the terminology rot gut whiskey? Quite a few people, you know. A lot of people assume rot gut whiskey was just this whiskey that was just so bad it would just rot your gut out. It's actually not what it's about. Rot gut whiskey was a direct correlation to the Bottle and Bond Act because what happened was rot gut whiskey, people were making false distillate and they were infusing it with chewing tobacco from their spittoons, and it literally would rot your gut. So that was kind of the implementation of what was happening over the course of time. And the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897 was what shut that down. That was a government seal of approval that stamped on that bottle and said, this is legitimate whiskey. It has to be at least 4 years old, done in one distillation time period. It has to be 100 proof. So that was the government's kind of remedy to all these false bottles. Now, a minute ago when we were talking about batches and about barrel types, I said, we don't make specific barrel styles for batches. Well, that's not 100% true.
So you lied to us.
A little bit. So no. So what we found out is formerly we were kind of just doing what whiskey complemented each other the best for. So that could be Kelvin, ISC, Spirit of Canton, all these different ones. But then when we started doing our bottled and bond for this new batch 0001, what we found out is Spirit of Canton is literally the only answer for us. There's really no point in putting a Kelvin in there, an independent state company, because the profile that just works the best is always that Spirit of Canton. And now Spirit of Canton, for those who don't know, is a cooperage down in Lebanon, Kentucky. Down there, they are owned by a French company called the Terence Group. Terence Group makes French barrels for wineries. So they are now owned by that group, and they actually started a yard in Kentucky. This was probably 15 years ago. Well, we were the very first cooperage, or excuse me, the very first distillery to go to a cooperage like Spirit of Canton and say, develop us a whiskey barrel like you would a wine barrel. Okay. So their response to that was tight patch grain wood, wood from all one specific forest region, galvanized rings on there to really hold it in together. So that whiskey that comes out is soft, it's elegant, it has finesse, very similar to like a wine would have. One thing that we do different as well is a lot of our entry proofs are all across the board. People ask, is your standard entry proof 125? No, it could be anywhere. It could be as low as 106 and as high as that 124.9. But for our bottle and bonds, we always make a Spirit of Canton run that goes in at 106. That way, when we drop it down with that reverse osmosis water to the bottle and bond proof, you're not interrupting the integrity of the whiskey. Because if you go from 130 proof to 100, you got a whole nother product at that point. But 106, 107 down to that 100, it still maintains that barrel characteristic. So that pour you'll see there has a lot of flavor, a lot of fruit, a lot of sweetness. It's all the quintessential notes of bourbon amplified at 100 proof.
Really solid.
It's a
Yeah,
good
I
one.
have a decent.
You haven't had it yet? Yeah, no, it's very good. We were very, very satisfied with the way that turned out. The reason for it is that most of the time we had a lot of inconsistency with the bottle and bonds. It's because we were adding Kelvin Coopers, Zach Coopers, all these different ones. And now that we're using one specific style, we have our hands fully fundamentally involved in it. Welcome, Jonathan.
Everybody look at Jonathan.
Yeah, everybody's there. Any questions so far? Excellent. Awesome. So a little bit of backstory about bottle and bond, bourbon, and the whole 9 yards here. So what you'll notice is if you saw our signature flagship bourbon, its name is Carl T. The number one question I always get asked is, who the heck's Carl T? So I can answer that for you. So again, we are a 7th-generation family-owned farm. Carl T was Carl in the 4th generation. My current owner at the farm, Ted, that was his grandfather. Back in the day, everybody was drinking brandies and wines. They're traditional brandy and German wine drinkers that were through there. But Carl wasn't. So we were growing grains on our farm. Carl was actually harvesting the grains, the rye, the wheat, the corn, and he was milling it down, mashing it, fermenting it, and actually distilling it on a small little copper pot still, which we actually still have. In using that, barreling that distillate, and using that whiskey for self-consumption. So a minute ago, I said, yeah, I know, right? Well, the unfortunate part is that the tragedy
This
of
is
the story.
recorded, so you know.
What?
This is being recorded.
Okay. Yeah. So, watch what I say. No, so the tragedy of this is that Carl actually passed away when our owner was 3 months old due to that self-consumption, unfortunately. So the remedy to that was to cut down the distillation program. So Carl's son, Carl Jr., in the 5th generation, had to drop out of the school as a senior, take over the farm, and watch over the family. So he focused fundamentally on agricultural. So he went and beefed up, the grapes, the strawberries, bringing people up here, implementing the U-Pick program, different things like that. Well, Carl also legitimized, like I said, the winery in 1978. So we started getting that ball rolling, and that's what we did for about 50 years. Well, then when Ted was handed the keys in 1995, Carl T's wife, who was still with us at the time, Marcella, said, don't let the mistakes of one man ruin the legacy for the rest of the family. Get a still, start distilling, get the practice back for us. So that's when we acquired that still. We patented it in 1998 for the trademark. We acquired the still in 2001, and that's when it really took over. So it was to Carl T, who again passed away for us. It was because of his knowledge and kind of forethought of distillation that kind of got the whiskey game going. But really, it's his partner, Marcella, is the reason why we're back into this game. Marcella, whenever they were kids, whenever Ted, our owner, was a kid, Marcella, whenever the parents were away, would take Ted, take him into the back, and while everybody else was learning how to drive a car, he was learning how to distill Applejack brandy at the age of 14 or 15. So, and he actually still has some of that original distillate in his house. I'm sure it's not crazy great. We can edit that out later. No, it's one of those things that he was learning how to do this at a very, very young age. So distillation has always been a part of his family in there. So that is where Carl T comes from. It's unfortunately the tragedy of Carl T, but also the forethought of his wife, Marcella, that really is the reason why we're here today. Any questions? Thoughts on the bottle and bond?
Very good. Just take a step here.
Sure.
Your forehead is like getting beamed by a lot of light. There you go.
So
that should cool you down.
Yeah.
Too. Oh, there you go. Much better.
Yeah. So if we don't have any questions, moving on to the next one. This is
Can we,
our
backtrack a little bit real
Yeah.
quick. Going back to the pot and column stills.
yeah.
Have you noticed any differences about like the product that comes off those two
100%.
and that how like affects the way you guys just your processes or like
So,
what goes on to what?
Just initially based on what we've seen, yes, there's 100% a difference. We won't have 100% answer to that until that distillate comes of age for us to really quantify it. So we're really looking at about another 2.5-ish years until we're back to it, a little over 2.5 years. But what we noticed so far is that the pot still varies based on the distiller that is going to be doing it. So the thing is that with a pot still, you have cuts. You're making the cuts between the heads, the hearts, and the tails. Well, those cuts are subjective to the person that is doing them. So the thing is that the boys, so we have Ted, who's again the owner in the 6th generation, his 2 boys, Christian and Blake. who are master distillers as well. So you have all three of them. They all are masters in their own trade, but they all have very, very different styles and palates. So the thing is that one cut will be different than another. So you have this inconsistency that goes on there, but the quality is always there. One might be a little bit more oily, more spicy. One might be sweeter and higher proof. One might be more of a higher rye version of it. It just depends on what the boys are doing on the pot still. But with the column, that takes all of that out. Because basically you're humming it at one speed with one proof. And as you're going with it, we're spitting it out anywhere between about 144 to 152. Depends on how the still's running that day. Connor, who's our head distiller, he came from Lux Row. So he already had column distillation trade. So he's our head distiller for the continuous column. It develops a consistently clean product. I always tell people when you go down there and you're able to drink, or I should say sample the white dog, we're not just over there slugging it. When you're down there, the one thing I always get from people is, well, how strong is this? And I say, 152 proof. And they're like, good God, this drink's like, it's like 110. It's because the grains that we use, the distillation style that we're doing, the fact that we're a sweet mash operation, not a sour mash operation, allows us to do all these things. So we don't 100% know the end yet because it hasn't come of age, but just based on the white dog distillate versus everything, it is clean, it is cut, it is sweet, it has elegance to it, and it'll get you in trouble at that proof. I can assure you of that. It's a good question. Sarah in the back.
I mean, I feel like you guys are pretty adept at terminology. Do you want to go very, very quickly over the difference between sweet and sour mash?
Sure. So the difference between those two is that for sour mashing, which who's the one that really made sour mash famous? Jack Daniels. So the one that really really what it was is that they put it on the label. And that's really what took it to the next level. So the thing is that with sour mashing, basically you're rolling a mash to the next batch to create that consistency of that product. So basically you're never starting from scratch. You're just basically rolling it over. I like to make the analogy that if you ever do like sourdough bread, you have to have a starter, and that starter allows you to make the next batch, and then that batch allows you to make the next. No different with mash and distillation. Sweet mash, which we are, is starting from scratch every single day. Every single day, Connor drives a forklift over to our mill room. He mills up all of the grain, brings it over for the next day, and freshly cooks it every single day inside of our 2,000-gallon pot. So every single day we're starting from scratch. Every single day we're starting new. We have two different variations of the fermentation cycles. We have about the 2,000-gallon fermenters that are a 7-day fermentation, and they are closed top. Those are a less heat and less aggressive yeast strain that goes a longer distance. Those are typically going to be used for pot distillation. Now we have 45,000-gallon open top fermenters that use a more aggressive yeast strain and higher heat, and those are on a 3-day. Those ones are getting put to the continuous column because we can churn and burn a lot more. We can get through almost 2 of those 4,500-gallon tanks in one day. So that's the one that we're using more with on there. So that is terminology. Good question, Sarah.
Do you find that the one that does the 7-day fermentation, is it more fruit notes? Or, I mean, what is there a rationale for picking the two different?
Absolutely. So it really depends on the yeast strain that you're going to use. So the yeast strain that we use for that specific one definitely acquires a little bit more of those fruity esters, stone fruits, orchard fruits, different things like that. It's not always the case because it's not always a fine-tuned science, and especially being with the sweet mash version of it, depending on how the grains react to cooking it, to harvesting it. I'd like to say that we're 100% on point every single time. We're farmers. If you know anything about agriculture, it's anything but like spot on every single time. So really it starts with the grains, and as long as the grains are the way that we've always had them, the moisture content inside the corn is still at the appropriate level. It hasn't started germinating, different things like that, because that has happened before. And let me tell you, you want to talk about a Frankenstein barrel, we need to get rid of those. Those are rough. But there's a lot of different ones that we have. So as long as those happen, you're definitely getting a lot more of those fruitier notes that are coming through. Whereas if you start doing like the 3-day, those ones are more of like your quintessential notes of bourbon. Those are the ones that come through. It's just that corn sweetness. You know, caramel and vanilla once it's integrated into the barrel. Before that, really what you're getting is just sweet cream corn. That's what it comes off with. And that's where the deception of proof starts happening, because you start trying and you're like, ain't no way this is 152 proof, because that sweetness, that viscosity, that oil absolutely coats the mouth and tames that ethanol completely. It's a very good question. Yeah. Any other questions? Don't be shy now. I'm a talker, so if you got questions, fire them off there. So, single barrel rye here, pick number 3. So this one is at 117.7 proof and it's 4.5 years old. This one was done in an independent stave company. So ISC. So what do we get with ISC? ISC are going to be a little bit more of those robust, big, bold, smokier notes for bourbon. But with rye, it actually tames it down a little bit into baking spice, and you're getting a little bit more of those amplified notes like you would in the double oak. So now you're getting a little bit more of that raw baking spice, a little bit of that cream, a little bit more of that citrus zest. It's just amplified just a little bit more on here. So this specific mash bill, as we remember, there's 2 of them. This mash bill was the 90-10. So it's slightly higher in that rye mash bill, slightly lower in that malted barley mash bill.
It's delicious.
Thank you. Yeah. Here's the thing about rye, and it's one of those things. Who's familiar with the infamous mash bill 95.5 for rye whiskey? Heard of it? Where does it come from? You remember?
MGP.
There you go. Where is MGP located?
Indiana.
Damn right. When you are a grain to glass and you are a non-outsourced company in Indiana, your full-time job is trying to educate the masses that we are not MGP. We have no interest in being MGP. We grow our own grains to do our own things. So people always ask me, oh, what's the mash bill on this? 95.5? I say, no, it's a 90-10 or it's an 80-20. I say, why don't you do 95.5? I say, because I want to have a job after this. It's one of those things that it's the biggest death sentence. If you're your own person in the distillation world, being in Indiana, being 2 hours away from the mecca that is MGP, and don't get me wrong, MGP makes some great products, real good products. But the thing is that we wanted to differentiate ourselves across the board. So when people finally took the time to understand and educate themselves and figure out that we are a non-source company, grain to glass and farm to glass, that there are other options out there other than the mass-produced 95.5. So you will not see a 95.5 come out of Starlight Distillery. Our people said, listen, I don't care if you want to get as close to it as you want to do 94.6, don't do 95.5, please. So that's where we ended up landing. Any questions?
We lost Squib and Starlight.
I was gonna say it's gonna be some type of hybrid, but it's that has been an uphill battle. And here's the thing, it's gonna be something that will never die. We understand that is going to be the largest uphill battle for us. You'd be shocked that I'll go through and spend 2 or 3 hours with a group, really getting into it, getting into the weeds about the product, talking about the rye, talking about the bourbon, pouring out the passion at the end. It's like, so when did you get this from MGP? And I'm like, where have you been? I was like, where have you been the entire time? So it's one of those ones that we understand it, and it's a logical question. Why wouldn't we be? But the answer is that we've always wanted to have total control. We can't be in control if somebody else distills something, and then we try to put the Starlight spin on it. So we have to start and finish. It took a lot longer to get here. It is a labor of love, and it's a hell of a lot more expensive. But the back end is the products that are right in front of you. So we think that it's worth it.
So you've never used MGP?
Never. But it's one of those things that it's like the more you try to tell people that you're not, the more they're just like, oh yeah, they're itchy.
Well, you put the body in
Yeah.
Indiana.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest part. So what you'll notice is that we start putting, instead of one of the biggest mistakes that we did was produced and bottled in Indiana. We're like, why didn't we put a city on there? Why would we do that? So now when we revamped the labels years ago, now you'll see bottled and produced at Starlight Distillery in Starlight, Indiana. We were like, we're gonna spoon feed this information to them, make sure that they know. So that was a little bit of a minor hiccup at that point. But any other questions about this?
One for Holly. Is there a Skurnik in the house?
Oh, the bottle.
The bottle.
Oh, there are Skurnik people too.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Thank you
people
for
have been
coming
buying
on.
it online already. So
Well,
you bought one,
right?
you're- Yeah,
Just-
it's really
Yeah,
good.
so just so you know, price wise, from the first 3 that we've had, the double oak rye, $75.99, bottled and bond bourbon, $59.99, and then the Skurnik barrel pick is $65.99, the rye.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's one on the shelf too.
Yeah, but we have a few up here.
Probably already sold online.
We wanted to taste this one because there's no finish. So you get to taste a true barrel proof rye in its natural
Yeah.
form from Starlight. So you probably don't have any left, but if you have a little bit left, I should have said, save it for when you compare it to our single barrel, because it's about the same age, and then ours has that honey finish.
Yeah.
So it'll be a nice comparison between the two ryes.
And one kind of interesting point about that rye is if you look at the bottle on the barrel number, it says barrel number 180033. Why is that important? Well, mostly it's not, but the 18 up the front tells you when it was barreled. So 2018. That was pre-COVID barrels. So what that means is that we had been a grain-based distillation for 5 years at that point. And so what we did is that meant that was being distilled still on the small 82 gallon still, while bourbon production was being done on the 500 gallon still. Why does that matter? The rationale between it is that, so imagine two different cars. Imagine a Ferrari and imagine a Cadillac, okay? Cadillacs can make a turn on a dime. When you want something done and you want to make that turn, boy, you zoom and you're around that corner real easy. That's like what the Christian Carl still is at the 82 gallons. When we tell it to do something, to make a cut, responds in about 20 seconds. Very, very easy to do. You can make very, very fine finesse cuts and therefore make a very fine, elegant, and finesse whiskey. Now you have a Cadillac. Nothing wrong with Cadillacs, not a Ferrari, but when you want to make a turn, you got to kind of think about it a little bit more. It's a little bit bulkier, a little bit wider, doesn't make turns as quick. When we tell that 500 gallon pot still to make a cut, we're looking at about 2.5 minutes. So you have to be really projecting where that's going and where you want that cut to be at. So that's the reason why you see a little bit difference between those pot stills. So this is actually kind of a little piece of history because we don't do rye on that pot still anymore. That arguably was probably one of the last runs of rye whiskey that we did on that small still, because then it just blew up and we had to make more. We couldn't just keep doing these small little runs on the pot still, so we moved it to the bigger production. So anybody that ends up walking out with that bottle of snow, it's probably about the last of its kind, so it's not bad.
Yeah, don't walk out with it until you come up here.
Yeah. I will defer to them after that. Yeah, please have a receipt for it. Yeah. None's worse than having me here for an event and then promote stealing your stuff. So, any other questions about pour 1, 2, or 3, family history, things about the farm, anything like that?
Sort of side by side of what you said, one we just did. Is there one aged yet that's from the other still?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's almost any whiskey, not here unfortunately, but any other, but any other one that you'll try now, any of those would become. So like Holly mentioned, so their single barrel their single barrel rye that they did of the honey finish. That is going to be the closest representation because that rye was produced on the 500 gallon still. So there might be, if you have a little bit left of it, do that side by side. But obviously they're going to be different because one has honey influence on it versus the other one just being rye. But at least you'll get a representation because I think you'll be surprised when you try it. You really get a good representation of that single barrel rye that came off the 500 gallon. Any other questions? Cool. Moving on to number 4 here. So this one is going to be our bourbon finished in rum casks. Now, for some people that don't know, we do produce rum on the farm. Actually, this year we are releasing our very first 10-year-old spiced rum. Very excited about that. Rum is not really something that we talk a whole lot about because it's Southern Indiana. It's not a big rum crowd. But believe it or not, the reason why we produce certain things is as a producer in the state of Indiana, if you want to have something like a rum and coke or a vodka cranberry or gin and tonic, and you're a producer, you have to produce the product in order to make the cocktail. So I couldn't bring in Captain Morgan. I couldn't bring in Tanqueray. We have to produce it if we want to sell it. So that's what we did. So we started producing silver and spiced rum, different variations of gin and different variations of vodka. But for this rum finished bourbon, that is not our rum actually. So a lot of people don't know this, and it's actually kind of funny that you have it. But I don't know if we talked about it either. But if you look to the left over there, my left, right above this gentleman is 2 bottles of rum on the far side. It says Rolling Fork. If you were to pick up that bottle, turn it around and look on the back, it will say bottled in Starlight, Indiana, because they actually hold all their barrels at our distillery. So they are doing all the blending, bottling, and labeling at our distillery. We don't own them. They just pay us rent to be there. But one of the things that we do is once they bottle their product, for example, I think that you have a Jamaican rum up there, 14-year. They would take that Jamaican 14-year-old rum barrel and they'd pass it over to me. And then I would fill that up and we would have a rum finished bourbon like this. What makes this one unique is that this was actually a 20-barrel small batch blend. I did 16 Barbados rum, ranging from 8-year all the way up to 18-year. And I also did 4 Jamaican rums, aging from 10 to 14. That one probably was actually in this blend, which is actually kind of funny. I was looking at that. I was like,
we've had that before. That Jamaican rum
Yeah.
is really, really good.
So the Barbados rum comes from Foursquare, and the Jamaican rum comes from Worthy Park. If you've had Jamaican rum before, you know it's a little bit funky. It's not the funkiest, but you start tiptoeing into that funk world. If you've had Barbados rum before, you know it's light. It's very, very sweet. It has those tropical notes, those caramel and vanilla notes on there. So we wanted that to be the dominant supply, while also having a little bit of Jamaican rum in there to let you know you're having rum. And we felt that 103 was a very appropriate proof for this. So this one is that blend of 20 different barrels. Youngest in there is 8-year, highest in there is 18. Feel free to
What's the
download.
ABV?
103. 103. So it is, other than the bottle and bond, that will be the lowest proof that we have. And we typically don't do that low of a proof. Usually when we do those larger small batches, 106 is usually our go-to. We feel like that's a very appropriate proof. But the thing is, in one of our promises that we say is we will not just do something because we've done it before. So just because we've been and traditionally stay at 106 because it's proven to be a good track record for a proof, doesn't mean we will always continue doing that. So prime example, we did 98, 100, 103, 106, and 109 proof to see the different variations of them. And 103 won every single time. Proof is in the palate. 103 was our winner. So that's what we decided to go with. Now, next time we do this, maybe 106 is the winner. Maybe 109 is the winner. It just depends on what shines the brightest that day.
So if you do anything rum finished, it's always a previous barrel from Wellington?
Now it is. Now it is. What you will see is we will do a Starlight one from our own Starlight rum barrels. We didn't really have anything. We had one or two things. We either had rum that was too young and it would be kind of, I don't want to say pointless to do it, but it wouldn't give the influence that we're used to. Or we had 9 and 10-year-old rum, and we're like, well, we can't just bottle that just for giggles. We have to wait for it. So now that we bottle the 10-year this year, we will most likely use those barrels as our next rum finish. But as of right now, 100% of our rum barrels come from Rolling Fork. And the really fun part about that is that if you are a rum connoisseur, or if you're not a rum connoisseur, because I'll tell you right now, I'm not. But the thing is that I really enjoy the influence that certain rum gives to the bourbon. So things that they have. Predominant ones that they're pulling are going to be Barbados, Jamaican, Venezuelan, and Dominican. Then you start getting real squirrely, and if you're one of those real funky rum people, kudos to you, but you start getting Fiji rum, Guyanan rum, Peruvian rum. That's when, if you've ever heard of like burnt tire as a tasting note, yeah, I know, nice, right? Yeah, it's one of those things that to the average consumer, if somebody were to say, oh man, this tastes like burnt tire, you'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? But then when you say to a rum person, oh, this has those pot esters with that burnt rubber, they're like, I get exactly what you're talking about. It's all about who your clientele is. The thing is, when I first heard that, I was like, are they like insulting these guys right to their face? And then as I got more immersed into it, I understand that is a legitimate tasting. It's like tasting like a very rustic Tokai and say, well, this really has that that basement cellar funk. Like, what are you talking about? They're like, when you go in like Mama and Pop's basement and it's all dusty and stuff, and you're like, I think these guys are hating on my product. No, it's just a tasting note that you get with there, and it's just painting the picture. So 100% get it. But this one is going to be predominantly that light fruit, that good caramel, that vanilla. I always like to say Barbados rum is more of a gateway rum for bourbon drinkers to get into the game. The thing I like about their rum that they do is they have it at barrel cast strength. So both of those rums, I haven't looked at it, but they're probably in between about 110 to 120 in between there. And so they don't proof it down. So when we get that barrel, it is cast strength rum, and that influence shines very bright on the cast strength bourbon.
Was there an age statement on this?
4.5 years old. So what that means is that the bourbon that went in there was 4 years old, and then we secondarily aged it for 6 months. They passed a law years ago for summation aging, where you could do the first initial barrel as a single barrel, and then add the secondary fill on there for the final day. Beforehand, you only had to do the single barrel one. So now that we can do summation aging on there, those bourbons rested in those rum casks in warehouse number 2 and warehouse number 3, which we'll show pictures here in a little bit of where those kind of look like. Those rested in there for roughly about 6 months.
Can you talk before we move on to double bourbon again about a couple of the other finishes that you were showcasing yesterday?
Lord have mercy. Yeah, so there's quite a bit. So in our portfolio, just at Starlight Distillery, we are leading the nation in finishing product. So what that means is that there is not even a distillery that is coming close to the amount of finishing that we have. And the reason for that is because we have the flexibility to be able to buy barrels that are 1 barrel, 2 barrels, 4 barrels. We don't have to buy 50 to 100 barrels at a time to justify it, like maybe a larger distillery is. And that means that we have wiggle room, we have play room. We can fail with 1 barrel. You know, we don't have to fail with 100. And believe me, we do from time to time. You know, it's a part of the game. You learn from your mistakes. But last, before we did the real cutback on there, because there's certain barrels that I'm just not confident in moving into 2025 that I think will be good in the market, but also I'm hesitant on the quality of them when they come in. You know, we've seen it scale back in certain quality on things like port wine, Oloroso sherries, things like that. And I just want to make sure that when we're bringing it in, the product is going to be the best product for you guys coming out. And if I have any shredded out on there, I just don't do it. So as far as we go, we do just for the full spread, we have single barrel bourbon, single barrel rye, single barrel light whiskey, and single barrel wheat whiskey. Moving up from that, we have double oak bourbon and double oak rye. And within those double oaks, we can have American, French, or Hungarian. A little bit of exclusive for you guys. You guys will be the first ones to know about it. We're doing a thing. We haven't done the name on it, so if we don't stick with this name, don't fault me for it, but we like the name on it. And it's going to be called the Continental Series. What that is that I'm pulling oak barrels from every continent, well, to a degree. We're not pulling Antarctica, different things like that. But for example, yeah, I was just saying we're gonna have to do something. So we're gonna be pulling oak from Europe, from Asia, Africa. We'll attempt to do Australia. That kind of is getting a little dicey at that point. Obviously North America, which is easy, but things like Mongolian oak, Slovenian, Ukrainian, Italian, different things like that. So we can see the exact breakup and markdown of all these different barrels. But then you go into the finishing world. Within the finishing world, I think we had somewhere in the realm of 60 to 70 different variations of finishing barrels. And some of those could be 200 barrels, some of those could be 1 barrel. You know, it just depends. And that's what is the fun part and the exclusive part about Starlight Distillery. You could be there on the right time, on the right day, and I could have 1 barrel of something that's an absolute diamond. You buy it, it's gone forever. You have the exclusive. It makes it fun. So we have a very diverse portfolio. And when we get into their single barrel selection, I'll really kind of dive into the fact of the difference between flavoring and finishing. Because there is a huge fundamental difference and a big stigma about that of what the difference is, and if there isn't, it is even one of them.
Can I ask a question going back earlier?
Sure, take it back.
The bottle and bond.
Yeah.
What was the mash bill?
Mash bill. Good question. I missed that part over there. So keep me honest. If you got one of those questions, fire up here. So just like the rye, we have 2 mash bills right now as we live and breathe for bourbon. Once that continuous column still comes of age, that's all going to change. We're going to have a plethora of both rye mash bills and bourbon. Let's talk about right now, though. So right now we have a 3 grain and a 4 grain. Those are for our single barrel bourbons. 3 grain, 60% corn, 20 rye, 20 malted barley. The 4 grain, 51% corn, 20 rye, 20 malted barley, 9% wheat. The wheat and the lack of corn are the difference between the two. There are fundamentally more 3 grains that we produce than 4 grains. Back 5 years ago, we produced more 4 grains than 3 grains. We saw the market receive these products, and 3 grain just was almost like 5 to 1 on reception on it. We just knew that 3 grains were kind of the more traditional way to go for Starlight. So we took both those mash bills and blended them together, and that is what gives you, for our bottle and bond, for our double oak, for any finishing product, is a blend of the two. We never really know because, well, we do know because we keep track of it, but it varies every single time how much 3 grain versus how much 4 grain is inside those blends. But I will tell you that traditionally it is far more 3 grain than the 4 grain. We want to make sure that we're utilizing those more than the 4, because the 4 is a good chance that it was distilled pre-COVID. Not an issue, but that is a very specific style, and it doesn't necessarily marry well with a blend. As a single barrel rock star, but we believe at the farm a lot of times the summation of all is greater than 1. That's why those blends work so well, but that's not necessarily the case in the 4 grain. The 4 grain, typically the 1 is better than the summation of all because it starts getting in conflict with flavors. Any other questions? Awesome. So we're going to move on to one of my personal favorites. This is the double oaked bourbon whiskey.
So
Yeah.
just a quick note on this one. This was only available at the distillery. This was a special limited release. So it's a very small pour that you guys have because there's 50 of us or 48 of us or whatever. But it is a special bottle. There were 3 different distiller select bottles.
Yes,
and then
so
family.
They do,
select.
yeah, they do every year on Repeal Day, Repeal Day being December 5th. They do our Repeal Day release. And what that means is we have the family reserves and the distiller picks. So 5 bottles get released every Repeal Day. The family reserves are, we go through about 100 barrels a year and we start culling them down, getting them down further and further. In the family reserves is a representation of all of us agreeing on 1 barrel. It's very tedious. We go through blind after blind after blind after blind over a month span of time. I know, boo-hoo, hard work, someone's got to do it. And so we go through and we keep doing that and keep utilizing that over and over again. So the family reserve is us saying, hey, we all agree this is the best barrel that is in my rick house right now. The distillers picks are Ted, Christian, and Blake. They get to go individually out there and say, I distilled this X amount of years ago, whatever it is. Maybe it's not always the oldest one, because again, palate is king. So if a 5-year beats a 9-year, it's what it is. But they get to go out there and say, hey, I distilled this. I think this is the best barrel that I produced out of this rick house. I want to put it out here. That is exactly what Christian Huber did for this barrel here. So this one is an 8.5 year, 126.6 proof double oak. I'm going to tell you a very, very good story about this, but I'm not going to tell you until you try the product first.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it.
I'm ready. That one that, yeah, this is one that's hidden deep in James' collection. This is-
Gotta play the eighth.
Finance board, you're not seeing that bottle. Hey, Jonathan Saul.
You guys can share the rest.
So,
Oh my God, I didn't mean at first to clear them.
Oh, no, you're good.
Jesus, you guys have some?
Yeah. And I can share with Jonathan.
so this bottle being the double oak, one thing that's unique about this is that this was done in French oak. So whatever the barrel count was that we did the blend in this, I think that this was about a 12 barrel blend. That was all American oak. That was all single barrels. It was all blended together. And then we filled up unused, fresh French oak barrels. They were all charred 2s with toasted heads. So a lot of people have different definitions of double oaking. For Starlight Distillery, what we do for double oaking is, and this math doesn't necessarily line up because cask size vary, but just for simple math, we're going to assume that it all equals each other. If we have 10 barrels that are single barrel bourbons, okay, 3 and 4 grain doesn't matter. Again, we believe the summation of all is greater than 1. So we'll take those 10 barrels and blend them all together. Make sure that they all agree with each other and it's the optimal proof. Again, we'll make adjustments as need be based on what it's giving off or what it's not giving. Then once we have that blend, we will refill it into 10 new barrels. And that gives you the double oak definition on that. So the reason why this is important is back about 2.5 years ago, we did a distillery only release called the Toasted Series. Okay, the Toasted Series was, we went and had 5 wooded regions in France, cut down a tree, constructed into a barrel, and sent it to us. The 5 wooded regions are Allier, Vosges, Nevers, Limousin, and Central Forest. I am from Southern Indiana, so I'm not putting the French twang on there. Yeah, I'm not doing it. I will butcher it. We look so dumb when we do it. So we're doing it's probably Nevers, but I'm gonna call it Nevers. So that's how that. So we have those 5 wooded regions. If you were to put a pin in the center of France and put an arch over that, that's where it is. They're predominantly all in the center of France. So once we had those barrels constructed, we got them in, filled them up with the same distillate at the same proof, the same age, aged them in the same location, and bottled them at the same time to see the fundamental difference of what each wooded region would derive for us. Okay. Went through, released it to the market, great reception, total fun, great little case study, great experiment. Okay. Well, now we wanted more. But this time we wanted to go even more in depth. So we went to those wooded regions, and this time we actually picked out the trees there. So we went there. I didn't get to go on that field trip. It sounds a lot cooler than it really was, but trust me, we're distillers and we're farmers. We don't know anything about trees. So someone's like, that looks good right there. So that's what we did. But the one thing about trees in the bourbon world is that it's no different. There are a million different factors of why that tree can produce X amount of flavors. Where's the water source? What's the soil like? Is there rocks in the soil? Where's the sunlight coming from? All these different things matter. So when they told us the optimal logs to harvest, we were like, absolutely, it sounds great. So we harvested them and they say, well, let's go back and split them. We said, split them? We don't typically do that in the States. Typically, we saw them up, churn and burn, get them turned into steaks, air seasoned, toasted, whatever, and get them out the door. So why do you quarter split them? So well, we'll show you. So they took us back there and they sawed the tree in half, which is not what they normally do. Broke that log open, and when you looked inside there, there was a bullet embedded in the tree. When you count the growth rings back to that bullet, it dates to the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Wow. There's still shrapnel embedded in those trees. So by sawing it, you run the risk of going blade on metal, and that's going to end up compromising the tree. So they quarter split the logs, alleviate the shrapnel, then they go and take the buzzsaw through it and then state it. Then if you want to take it even further, what they do is they do a thing called the elongated toast. A toast for a normal barrel can be anywhere from a couple of minutes to maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. These ones had the elongated toast where they took smoldering embers and they held that barrel above that for 45 minutes to an hour. They had an infrared laser that shined into the core of that barrel and it gauged internal temperature. If it got too hot, it raised up, got too cold, went back down. So every single one, I know, right? It's like, we're not busy enough. And so once we went through there and we got all those done, all of them had the same set flush toast temperature. They ended up getting a char 2 on them. And then once that happened, heads were slapped onto them, sent to the States, and we were able to construct that barrel. Why is this one so important? The reason why this is important is because we decided to do something which was kind of a stretch. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, but that's the reason why it's so special that you all get to try. This was actually a blend barrel. And of course, when you first hear blend barrel, you think, oh, it's blended whiskey. Not what I'm talking about. A blend barrel is exactly 20% of all 5 of those wooded regions made into one barrel. So a 5th Allier, a 5th Vosges, 5th Nevers, there's all of these things into there. So you get the full spread of those barrels. These barrels went in at 118 proof and upped it to almost 127 proof. So please enjoy that. That is a historic bottle. I'm happy we get to share it with you guys. Well, most people don't believe me about that. And then all of a sudden, I thought Ted, my boss, was just kind of like, you know, oh yeah, there's a bullet embedded there, the Battle of the Bulge. I'm like, okay, Ted, cool. Pulled out his phone, he has a damn video of it, and he got to keep it. And I'm like, touche. You got to keep bullet. Yeah, touche. Yeah, I don't know if he was supposed to keep going,
exactly
but
what
yeah.
Said touche properly, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. See, I can't pronounce Nevers, but hey, listen, I got touche. Yeah.
You never found barbed wire?
You
You never found barbed wire?
No barbed wire, no claymores, no mortars, nothing. I'm sure there's some around there, but it's funny because normally where we harvest the stuff at is way up high where there's not a whole lot of bullets. So if there is a bunch of bullets out there, someone had a hell of bad aim, so it's just shooting all over the place. No. So not every tree's like that, but there are quite a few that do have that shrapnel still embedded there. So it's a cool little thing. Whenever I go and do barrel picks and we go through, I like to explain everything before we taste. But for this one, I'm always like, hey guys, go ahead and taste this whiskey first because I don't want you to be blinded by a Battle of the Bulge story. Because unfortunately, I can't put that on the back label. So try the palate first. So what do you guys think about that double oak?
Excellent.
Good. It's a good pour. It's a legendary pour. I think of that. Honestly, typically my palate aligns with Blake Huber, which is our owner's youngest son. Me and him are just very similar in that fashion. But this year I had to give it to Christian. It was outstanding what he did, the way he blended it all together, got those oak barrels. And Christian was the winner. Because of course, we have to have a competition. Which boys is going to sell out first? That means it was better than all the other ones. To no fault, Christians did sell out first.
I did ask you which one I should buy.
And I told him, I was like, don't tell Christian this, but it was the best one out of there. I was like, if you ask, tell him I like Blake.
He's not the one that's all married.
No. That one's Blake. Blake's the one that's married. Christian is getting there. Yeah. Christian's getting there. So he's taking the plunge.
Is that recorded?
Yeah.
We heard a lot about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Do all barrels get individually tasted at some point,
Absolutely.
or do some just never go through that?
No, there is not. We are again palate tasters at the farm. There is not a barrel on that farm that has turned 4 years old that we have not tried. There are quite a few that we do progression tastings on just to make sure nothing strange is going on. But with everyone varying so differently, it's tough to say, okay, these 2 barrels out of 100 taste good. They all are going to taste good. It's just one of those ones just to make sure that if they all are from the same distillation pattern, they should all be fine. Unless, of course, you get the anomalies every so often where there's some strange ones, but for the most part, everything that gets tasted. And also on top of that, every barrel that gets sold will be tasted every week or 2 weeks. We'll knock that bottle off. Every week or 2 weeks. So for Holly's and Charles, the reason why we had it done at that point is because I went by taste and I said, I think this is peak. I don't think we're getting better than this. I think if we let it go any further, we're gonna actually start going down there. So that's when I said, pull it, get it going, let's get it rolling. So we're just waiting on labels to come in, and it's going to be up to you. So you guys should have it anytime. So it's very exciting.
Cool about because this was a later one that we tried.
Yeah.
Originally, we were tasting some of the older whiskeys, and it just goes to your, your conversation of palate. Because
Yeah.
we knew how old everything was, but we still went with.
Palate is king.
Yeah.
The story of what you guys did.
Come on.
Yeah.
Do you want to show the photos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show photos and stuff.
Do you want me to give all of my tasting notes?
Yeah. So
Do whatever you want. It's your show, girl. Come
All
on.
right, we have another hour for Holly's tasting notes.
All right, hold on.
They are very creative.
Wait, why don't we listen to Charles's notes? Oh, he doesn't have any.
I have a lot of notes.
Shots fired.
Okay. So these are my notes from, it's funny, there's a lot of, well, you can see it.
Yes, barrel 11, barrel 10. Can't read it.
The notes get shorter and shorter, so clearly.
She went from writing normal to like break.
Just a bunch of pictures.
We knew we wanted a rye, so we only tasted ryes. The first one, I'm already missing information, but the first one was the 8-year-old, right? Didn't we taste, we like came out of the gate with a pretty old single barrel.
That sounds about right.
We tasted that and apparently liked it. And then the second one was no finish. We liked that one too, but we really wanted a finish, so we kept kind of pushing. That was to warm up our palates. The third one was a double oaked, so it would have been comparable or in the same world as the first whiskey that you had. Then that one was 7 years old, the one that we tried. We liked that one. The fourth one was, let's see here. The fourth one was a Calvados finish. It has to be because I just wrote apples. The fifth one was where we started to get into the honey finishes, because we tried 2 different ones. And I think this is just a really cool part about the farm is that the first one we tried was a winter harvest honey. So I think we have some beekeepers, but whatever is blooming or in season at that time of year is going to reflect in what the bees are pollinating. So that was a winter harvest honey. Then we tried a maple finish, an Armagnac, a cognac. We searched for about 30 minutes for a Madeira, but we never found it.
Photos while we're always talking here. Hold on.
And we tried the Fall Harvest Rye, which is the one that we ended up picking, but we came down between Fall Harvest Rye or Fall Harvest Honey finish and then the Armagnac finish. And that's when we went to the carpeted room and tasted that blind.
A lot of snow.
Yeah, so these are some of our photos from the distillery. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that was Rickhouse number 5, which was the newest Rickhouse that we just built back in April.
Okay.
And that is an 8,000 barrel warehouse.
Yeah.
It's our largest one.
So this is,
Hold on, that's our feet.
Cool.
What, hey,
I don't know how to-
temperatures do that?
We don't. It's Mother Nature heated and cooled. There is not 1 ounce of electricity in that Rickhouse.
just arrow.
Wouldn't the
You're
temperature
trying to go
change
over?
from season to season?
Absolutely. And
Charles,
so
you bragging
that's
about
what-
being army.
that's what we get, the flexibility. and
Just click on it.
uniqueness. We can have 4 different.
Yeah, there you
And that's what it's about. We're 1,000 feet above sea level, very humid up there, so that's what impacts our whiskey. So the inconsistency. No, we want Mother Nature to work us in every aspect, because that is what delivers great profits.
But it could also offer you, like, if it stays too hot and too long.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is that if it stays blistering for too long.
You just click over.
If I have to scrape up single digit days, it'll shrink.
Sorry, guys.
I just think,
Oh, we have.
Oh, that was the last one. Oh, so,
All right, here we go.
okay.
I have the one at the, I don't know, like the wine.
All right, back to the
Yes.
screen here.
The K, and that's what we do ours down at our wine, so at 65 to 55.
Oh, so
There we
it's down
go.
there.
Yeah, so we have those. wines.
Yes, you can see the column in the pot.
We throw them on the pot.
And all of the equipment is in the distillery building. The warehouses are behind it where the sunset is.
To implement humidity.
And then this is us just hanging out in the barrels.
We believe that you don't want to put-
Charles decided to just sit.
Sitting on the job, Charles.
Yeah. He didn't want to go in the barrels. I think that's when, yeah, we chose it. So we started with some barrels that Andrew had pulled right across from the pot and column stills. And then we pushed them a little more and we were like, let's try more. And that's when we went into the warehouse.
This is,
We went on the infamous hunt for the Madeira.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, that's what it was. So this is actually Andrew drawing a sample. Pretty talented.
yeah, he's-
I'm not super old, but my knees don't do it like they used to, so I'm just saying.
And then this is the warehouse this is warehouse 1, you said?
Warehouse number 2. So this is where all of my finishing and oldest barrels are typically held. If they would have come in April or May, this is where we would have done 100%. But those barrels that are on the inside came from this warehouse. So that is,
And how many barrels on site? in
so
total?
warehouse number 2 at max holds 2,500. Barrel number 3 at max holds 3,500. Brickhouse number 4 at max holds 6,500, and warehouse number 5 at max holds 8,000. Not all of those warehouses are fully booked. We're sitting on about probably between 12 to 1,500 barrels, give or take. But that rick house that he just showed you will never be full, because that's where we pull our blends out for bottle and bonds, for the finishing products. I sell my single barrels. So the rate that we sell versus the rate of those barrels coming of age, they'll always overlap each other. So it'll never be fully full.
So I'll let Andrew jump into all about the honey and everything, but from what I wrote down, maybe this is still the case, the barrel that the honey went into, so it was in New Chardo, then went into this finishing barrel, and that barrel that the honey was in was an old Fitzgerald barrel. Maybe I was just really happy that day, but it was an old Fitzgerald barrel. And my original tasting notes were lemon lime custard, pear, lychee, some earth, root beer, and I wrote nice mouthfeel, doesn't taste like it has a lot of alcohol. Those are my initial tasting notes. The final,
114.5.
yeah, it was 115 when we tried it, you said it roughly, so, yeah.
But also, like, we didn't know what we were gonna do. Like, when we went, we we were thinking actually some other finishings.
And I think
Right.
actually out the gate we were kind of like, let's we might stay away from the honey. We don't know. And then
Yeah,
we
no,
were
I mean, honey was
anti-honey.
not on our mind.
wasn't on the
Yeah.
docket.
Wasn't on the docket. And I think was it the second one we tried was the honey?
No, actually, we didn't get into the honeys.
We did 2 honeys. 'Cause remember the first
Right, the
one
first one
wasn't-
was way. on.
Yeah, but that one was a little bit down the line.
That was the winter
Yeah.
harvest.
Yeah.
So what, sorry, what is the honey, was there honey in the
Honey in
barrels?
the barrel.
Let me.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
this.
yeah, let's-
There's your
Yeah.
agriculture.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm the kind of invade your area. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Where do you get your barley from?
So we typically pull barley from reputable regions like the Dakotas, Minnesota, southern Canada. I think we've even done western Wisconsin. Those areas, they go south down to a malt house that we partner with in Illinois. And then once it's malted to our specific light, it goes to their service.
You select it based on how they dry it? You select it based on how they dry it?
Yeah, so we could have them do a chocolate malted style if we wanted to. We could have them do applewood smoke where they smoke staves in there. We traditionally just do the baseline malting on there just so we don't get too complicated. But we've even done mesquite smoked before, and yeah, it was good. We won't do it again, but it was good. Very very specific. It kind of tastes like bit into a Lay's barbecue chip. So yeah, do those something. So, honey finished bourbon. So we have 2 trailers of beehives on our farm.
Well, this is rye.
Yeah, sorry, honey finished rye. So sorry, I'm still in the bourbon game here. So we have 2 trailers of bees that are on our farm. And what we can do is we can manipulate where those hives are based on what's blooming on our farm. So the thing is that this was a late summer
Hold up,
fall.
guys.
This was a late summer into fall honey harvest. So what that means is the bees were pollinating things like the tail end of peach season, entering into apples, ground-based vegetation like kale, squash, zucchini, all these different things that are down in there. So it had this very herbaceous, light sweetness to the honey. So all of this is unpasteurized honey. So I'll tell you a story about how we figured this out. So it never really dawned upon us to really look into unpasteurized honey. But what we found is that unpasteurized honey is a living organism. There's the age-old debate, what was the first spirit or what was the first alcohol produced? Was it wine or was it mead? Both of those in the same environments will God-given make alcohol if all the temperament is correct. So what happened was we had an ex-whiskey barrel. Okay, didn't have any liquid in it, but there's still moisture embedded in the staves. You can't get rid of 100% of the moisture out of an ex-barrel. So what we found is we filled that bad boy up and we're like, oh, excited. Yeah, we're going to age honey inside there. Well, what we found was unpasteurized honey looks to saturize itself down, meaning it's a moisture-seeking organism. So what happened was that it went and pulled all that moisture out of the staves and replaced itself in there. What does that do? Dries and solidifies the boards and they start to pull apart. And if we were down in southern Indiana, I would take you exactly into the distillery where I found this out. Because there's a puddle of honey that's still stained on that floor. It's actually right next to where your all's barrel was in there. It was just covered with all barrels, so we couldn't see it at that point. But we realized that that's an issue. So what was the remedy to it? What we decided was, instead of full filling those barrels, you fill it up a quarter, fill it up a third of the way, and you rotate. And you continuously rotate over however long it takes to do that. You break down that honey. If it's in the warmer season, it goes much quicker because that honey breaks down, gets in quicker, it thins out. If it's in the colder season, it takes a little bit more time because you're breaking down that honey slower. And as you rotate, you're getting you're getting that good honey embedded in those staves. You're removing the moisture, but you don't get to the point of solidification where it starts to pull apart. So then once we do an elongated drip, which means we literally will take that honey, open the bung, let that drip out and extract all the honey out of there. We actually end up bottling that and selling that in our gift shop. So we do the honey finished bourbon out of there. So it's nice fun. It's very good. Turns out unpasteurized honey has a cult following. People buy that more than in my wildest dreams. People come from all over the States because they're like, we heard you have bourbon barrel honey. And I'm like, oh yeah, we have a good bourbon finish. And they're like, no, just the honey. I'm like, stock up what you can. So whenever we have those bottles, then what do? We then take those casks and we refill them with either bourbon or rye. In this case, it's a rye blend. Well, what happens? That honey is still embedded in those staves, and unpasteurized honey is a moisture-seeking organism. So at that point, the honey comes out of the staves and it marries with the whiskey, and that's what gives you honey finished rye or honey finished bourbon. Just like the one in front of you, 114.5 proof from the late summer, early fall harvest of honey in that old Fitzgerald cask.
And the age on this?
4.5, I believe, is what I told you. Yeah, 4.5 years old.
What is a Fitzgerald?
So Old Fitzgerald is a brand from Heaven Hill. It's very, very coveted. They go in decanter bottles. I don't know how I ended up with that barrel. Most likely what it was is that was a barrel that was going to be used for rolling fork rum. Didn't get used or got put in the wrong warehouse, and we got our hands on it and we filled it up with honey on because it didn't have rum in it to begin with. So I think that just was a barrel that just slipped through the cracks of rolling fork, because there would be no reason for us to have an Old Fitzgerald cask out there, because the cooperages that we work with don't just like, hey, we made a bunch of Old Fitz casks, you want them? Like, no. So we ended up with it. So it was really cool to see that influence of another bourbon onto the honey, and then the honey onto all the rye whiskey.
Does it same process like maple syrup in the barrel, same kind of thing?
So it's the same thing in theory, but maple syrup is not a living organism, so you can fulfill that bad boy all the way. So we do a maple finish as well. We do not grow maple on the farm, so we have a local farm that's about 20 minutes away called Sugar Bush. We actually just got done with the Maple Syrup Festival, if it doesn't sound as Southern Indiana as possible. But that is one that they do a craft maple syrup for us, and they can fill that bad boy up all the way. It's not going to have, it'll have the same thing as it seeps into the wood, but it's not drying it out. It's not solidifying it. It just rests inside there. So it's the same theory for the sugar content, but not the actual process through it.
So any syrup.
Any syrup really, except for anything that is living with yeast, organisms, different things like that.
What are the tasting notes?
We have a question.
Yes.
So do you notice a difference in the angel share when you've got crystallized honey in your pores versus not? I mean, does it make it sort of a teetotaler barrel so the angels don't get their
Well, this is what I noticed on there is that it's kind of an interesting game to play, because the thing is that a lot of times what's happening is that, so let's say that we did this in well, heck, let's say that we harvested the honey like right now. So it's early spring. I'll tell you this right now, there's nothing to pollinate on the farm, so this is a bad example. But we harvest that honey right now. We barrel age it, we put it out in the rick house. Okay. We let it sit for 6 months out there. So now we're talking about pushing into the heat of the summer, really into fall. What we notice is that break of where there's that solidification and it kind of breaks open to where there could be leaks and things like that. What we notice is it's kind of a cat and mouse game, because what happens is that honey starts seeping through the actual stave lines, but then with the heat, it seals itself back up. Okay. So now you almost have a more solidified barrel than you started with. Okay. But now at this point, now that basically think about it's very similar to thinking about like taking glue and gluing them in there, because that's what it is. Solidified honey, as long as it does solidify, whenever the sun goes down, cools off a little bit, it hardens out. Well, now when that angel share happens, it's looking for the weakest spot on the barrel. Traditionally, where's the weakest spot? The bunghole, if it's not flush with the barrel. So that's where it's kind of the hit or miss of, are we going to be able to get angel share out of there? Is it going to last long enough? Do we have a perfect condition where we almost have a 100% solidified barrel, and we're going to start running that osmotic pressure on there and really put that whiskey under stress? When we put that whiskey under stress, what is that going to do to the honey? Is that going to be something that it's going to infiltrate and sweeten up? Is it going to be something where the whiskey takes over? That's the fun part about it all. It's also the very stressful part about it all. But it's one of those things that those things do matter. So we typically see a normal yield of angel share that comes out, which it's kind of hard to quantify a yield of angel share. But especially when you walk out in those rick houses, you can almost identify what barrel is getting cooked the hardest, because what happens is you almost get hit with that ethanol in that flavor. You can almost, it's almost like taking a shot. It's nuts. You can walk in there and it's like, oh, that's honey. And you can see exactly where that's at, because a little bit of our rick houses that are set there are not just sat there by, just because we wanted them there because they look good. So if you go in that rick house and you stand directly in the middle, and let's say this line on this board right here is the very center of the rick house, which we do have concrete cut out there, you are exactly 6.5 degrees off due north. Why does that matter? The reason is because where the rick houses are shaped, you're almost due north. They're red barns with black roofs. That means the sun rises in the east and starts implementing heat onto that rick house, and then it settles in the west and starts cooking very, very hard on there. So if we have a non-overcasted day, bright sun shining down on there, that sun hitting that red tint on the barn is a neutral color. You're not white where you're absorbing, or excuse me, where you're reflecting it, and you're not black where you're absorbing it, except for on the roof. So now you have that thick layer of heat. So depending on where the hottest element in the rick house is, depends on what barrels are in there. And that usually are the ones that are getting hit the hardest, thusly having the most angel share getting taken away from them. That's where you walk in the rick house, and when you get smacked in the face with that, and you're just like, oh my gosh, that's port wine. You know, most likely the hottest part of that rick house is getting cooked at a certain point on there. So it's all by design. We do a lot of shuffling around, because if we look and see that there's barrels that are progressing way too rapidly and they're put under too much stress, we might move them over to the eastern side if they're on the west. Adversely, if we do a couple of years on the east side and we say, not a whole lot's happening with these, we might move them over to the west side to get a little bit more of that heat implementation to it. Good question. Any other questions?
This was 6 months in the honey barrel?
Yes, so this one lasted from 6 months. So that means that we would have harvested it out. Yeah, that would have been from late summer into the fall in there. So yeah, 6 months in the cask. That's a very interesting time frame, because that's where you're getting the tail end residual heat from the fall, and then you start settling out in the winter. And what was particularly unique about this one is that it never got put into the harsh elements. It moved from the rick house, which had the heat going down, and then we moved it into the tank room where we did the pick, just because I didn't want them to have to do barrel picking in like 12-degree weather and you can't taste anything. Everything tastes the exact same. Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not fun. Climbing those barrels on steel racks is an absolute nightmare. So it only got to see a heating element in there, whether it was kind of just a neutral heat, like being inside, or it was a Mother Nature tailored heat. So that's the reason why those flavors are derived from there. So Holly was wondering about too, what flavors are you getting? You can say honey if you want.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, you could
Yeah.
say honey.
Yeah.
Honey, it's a little herbal, floral.
Yeah. Little herbaceous.
So more like honeysuckle almost, because
Sure, it's a little bit more,
floral
it's
honey
like
than
that
it is-
vegetal honey.
Yeah.
almost, yeah.
Like a honeysuckle.
Yeah, honeysuckle, absolutely, which we actually have quite a bit of it. It's really funny. Now, back in the day, whenever you got in trouble, you had to go pick string beans because you had to bend down and get them. That's what we would do when we were in trouble. That means like, you ticked me off, you did something wrong. If they send you out there and says, go pick honeysuckles, brother, you are on the chopping block. And the reason why is we don't use honeysuckles for anything. So he's having you pick something that we don't even use. So, yeah. What other tasting notes? Don't be shy. There's no wrong answers.
Wow, usually
Except if
Shalom,
you
like
say
any-
vodka.
Yeah, that could get a little dicey.
I mean, what I will say is it didn't have as much of pronounced rye notes as I'm used to.
Sure.
The honey and the sweetness kind of mellowed out the rye spice.
Correct. It kind of does this thing where I like to use the terminology appropriately invasive. It basically didn't shadow the rye. It kind of coated and changed the rye. So you're in there and you get this beautiful pronunciation of the honey, but you also get that nice, soft, mellow variation of the rye. And they're very complementary to each other. The honey isn't trying to topple the rye, but the rye is also not trying to topple the honey. They're kind of just going down this path together.
Yeah, I mean, where the rye came out, I didn't notice much rye on the nose or on the palate, but kind of the longer it lingers,
Yeah,
it's in the finish is where you get the rye.
absolutely. Yeah.
What I found is that it wasn't the first sip, it was more later sips that the rye came out.
Yeah.
Because your palate had to adjust to that
100%.
sweetness.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first couple of steps were so much honey, and then you actually started like breathing.
Right.
And it's one of those things too, that if you put that in front of you, for me, I would taste it and say, well, this is good. Where are we sitting at 90, 92, maybe 95? And then you find out it's almost 115. And you're like, I don't believe you. Yeah, so it's one of those things that's very deceptive. I'm not huge on a lot of different variations of cocktails, but what I will tell you, doing a bee's knees with this, doing a hot toddy with these. Oh my gosh, we don't get sick days on the farm. We just get 2 ounces of this and we get right back. It is a universal pour. It is great in cocktails. It holds up well on a rock, and it's also quality to drink neat. So it's kind of your overall type of barrel pick. It's one of those ones that you can check every box for every type of drink. even if you want to mix it with Coke. Drink the whiskey you way you want to.
We're sick, 6 days out of the week here.
6 days out of the week?
That's a shock.
You gotta.
We're closed Monday.
Yeah, I know, because I tried to break it.
Charles, when will the shop? When is this for sale in the shop?
It's actually for sale today.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So we are running, Holly and Charles are running a pre-sale for this. Since you guys are attending this event, you guys get the first stab at purchasing the bottles. I will tell you, this was a smaller yield. There's only about 120 of them. So if you guys want to make sure that you get your hands on it, definitely pick up 1, 2, a case today if they are.
We're expecting it end of March.
If you buy a case, you get a hat.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. He's just kidding.
If
2
you buy
cases.
4
get you a hat.
bottles, you get a sticker.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
No, I think we have enough hats for everybody. We'll see.
Yeah.
Is Rob on the Zoom? I mean, he needs to buy a case.
No, Rob's not.
Yeah.
You said there's only 130 bottles?
120.
120, was it a 30 gallon or a 30 gallon? Or?
No, so it's just one of those things that, so we decided to specifically verify the yield on there. So that one, this barrel was a 53-gallon barrel, was not filled all the way. So that's just one of those things that it just depends on, how much distillate we have. It depends on, what we think it's going to do, how it's going to react on there. So not every barrel gets filled up all the way as a finishing barrel. So a slightly smaller yield.
I think it's the 7th generation walking around with their samplers.
Listen, I can't confirm or deny, but yeah, when we started it, it was 53 gallons. When we got done with it, it was like, I don't know, maybe 30.
You saw that warehouse.
Oh, yeah.
It was siphoned.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how much sugar actually ends up?
No, because it differs. So the one thing that we'll tell you is that we are almost instrumental in every aspect of our farm. We are not beekeepers. We ain't doing that anymore. Ted doesn't like bees. Bees don't like him. So beekeeping actually ended on the farm in the 5th generation with Carl, who started the winery. So we actually partner with a local gentleman named Kevin Bowman. He's a full-time beekeeper, and he specializes in barrel aging honey. So he tracks all of that for us. And to us, we don't really need to keep track of the sugar. He'll come in and be like, it's a sweet one. And we'll come back and say, this one's a little more herbal, this one. So he kind of just gives us a context clue of where we're going. That helps us. And of course, we taste everything before we go in there. That helps us tell us, okay, what kind of proof do we need to be in at? What kind of barrel do you think that we're going to use for it? What kind of blend is specific to it? So we are able to tailor it. Yes, we keep track of it. We don't monitor it as heavy as we do, because we also know, now that we've been doing this for so many years, we typically know almost to a T when the season is pollinated what it's going to come out looking like, based on spring and summer is more fruit driven, fall and winter is more of that herbaceous vegetables. So we know kind of where we're going to land at for it.
Does he hire his bees out to pollinate?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, everyone's on full time there. Yeah, no. So it's funny because last year when we first started this, I think we harvested something like 1,800 pounds of honey, and we were like, "Wow, that's nuts!" And then we did it again, and I think this last year was something just like south of 6,000 pounds. Those bees were doing overtime. Yeah, so it was very, very impressive. That is a lot of honey to use. So. We're actually going to be doing a little bit more of those special variations of honey as we continue down the line. Maybe some small batches here and there, but we have a lot more honey to work with. So no meat yet. We've been asked about it, but as soon as we do mead, we're going to do beer. And by God, like I said, we're busy enough. I don't know if we can have a 3rd point to it. So
Barrel aged.
yes, I was like, good Lord, just another thing. So guys, the last pour that you all have here is a very special one. One thing to take note of about this there are 2 places in the United States that you can get this at. New York and Starlight, Indiana. Only 2 places that this is distributed in. So we thought that New York would do terrific with it. It's a very specialty product. It's one of a kind. It happens to be the oldest bottle that we have out on the floor. This is an 11-year-old estate bottle and bond single barrel apple brandy. Okay. So this is distilled apples from our farm. We have on average about 13 different varietals of apples that we use. They're juiced into a cider over into our cider house, because we also do apple cider on the farm. So once they're grinded into apple cider and pressed, we have it come over to the distillery. We distill that juice down into a brandy. And once we do that, it'll be done into one of 2 things. It'll either get put into toasted French oak and be our Americanized Calvados style, which is going to spend 8 to 10 years inside that toasted French oak barrel, or it's going to go into charred American oak for 4 years and become Applejack Brandy. Well, we decided to put some of the more higher quality barrels back in the way. And when we finally revisited them, we saw that they were 10, 11, and actually now we're going to be putting out a 12-year-old. So this one is actually an Applejack Brandy single barrel that comes in at 11 years old, 100 proof. It is an apple bomb. This is a hill that I will die on. This, in my opinion, is about a top 5 thing we have ever produced. It's very elegant. It's very refined. This is a gateway bottle for bourbon drinkers to get into brandy. It has terrific flush apple notes while also having that sweet vanilla and oak in there. This is a bourbon drinker's brand. I'm sorry, say that again. No, it's 100% apple dry. It's 100% young. There is no neutral grain about it. It's 100% distilled. Yeah, 100%. Everything, if you do the apple.
Minimum. That's what we're looking at. More than that. This is special.
Applejack you had on our bag. This Applejack 11 year and the Calvados one all across the board. I would say.
That's something worth mentioning. It's 100% brandy.
Yeah.
And Applejack world.
Yeah, Sarah brings up a very, very good point. So in the Applejack brandy world, typically it has to be at least a certain percent of a neutral grain spirit married with the brandy. For our Applejack brandy, that's 4 years old. Our Calvados apple brandy, that is 10 years old. And then this bottle and bond Applejack, it is 100% apple brandy. It is apples pulled from our farm, juice distilled in barrel. Nothing more, nothing less.
What's
Yeah.
the varietal?
I'm sorry.
What's the varietal?
So there's multiple different ones. The main ones that we use are Jonathan Gold, Golden Delicious, Mutsu, Stamen Wine Sap, Fiji Gala. Those are the most predominant ones. And then we have a couple different hybrid ones that go through that. And I say on average, we actually could have upwards of 15 different varietals. It just depends on how Mother Nature reacts to it. A lot of the trees are much younger. And actually what we did was just rotate one of the apple orchards. We not only rotate vineyards, but we rotate orchards as well. So we always are taking samples of soil to see how the integrity of it is holding up, making sure that it's not descaling, making sure that it doesn't have disease. And when we see signs of scale back, we go ahead and tear up the entire orchard and we plant fresh ones in a new property up there. It's very tedious. We only have to do it like, every 40 or 50 years. And coincidentally, that 40 or 50 year mark was like last year. So a lot of bonfires on the farm. It was a great time. But that's what we do for it. So typically we get about those 13 different varietals. It's super fun because on the farm, not only do we have the winery and the distillery, we have the farmers market that's over there as well. So all of our produce and all of our grains are 100% for farm use. We don't contract with grocery stores, other chains. Everything that is grown there is used there. So you'll walk in on apple season, walk in a farmers market. There'll be a big old banner up front and it'll tell you exactly what varietals are in season and what you can pick at that time. We have U-pick wagons that are constantly cycling every 10 minutes, where we have giant case tractors with about a 30-person trailer on the back end. If you come in and you only have 1 or 2 people and you mention that you're from First Fill in New York, I'll throw you on my Kubota and I'll drive you myself. We'll go around there and see the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
So you guys do everything.
And we
So
try.
assuming there's a Christmas tree farm out
Of course,
there.
Douglas firs and spruces.
So how many employees?
Not enough to tell you that. So to talk about the Christmas tree aspect first, yes, he is correct. We do grow Christmas trees on there. We do grow, yeah, we do grow Christmas trees up there. And actually, the reason why we do that is, of course, it's a great tourist driver. We'll get you guys a bunch of pours, or we'll get you some sangria, hand you a bow saw, and tell you go cut some down. It's a miracle more people haven't been hurt doing that. No, but we actually use those as erosion defense and irrigation systems. So the thing is, when we have a very heavy, dense rain, we're on 1,000 feet above sea level, meaning it's a very hilly environment. So when we have heavy rains that could potentially due to flooding or still water, we plant those trees on the sides of hills. That way, when the water rolls down, those conifers can suck up that water, and it helps them grow quicker, and it alleviates erosion and different things like that. Now, to your acreage question. Connected, we only count what is connected to our farm. Being that we've been a family there for multiple generations, we have family farms all across, southern Indiana, all across Starlight, Indiana, Bourbon, but they're not directly connected to the farm, so we don't count them. What's connected to the farm is just above 800 acres. So probably, if I had to take a guess, I'd say closer to maybe 1,200, 1,300 acres in total. But again, we only count what's physically connected to our land. Employee wise, definitely not enough. So to put this in grain perspective, for like the sales team that goes out and is responsible for almost 50% of the United States, there's 4 of us. Not a lot. It's a lot. I'm saying I don't get a lot of sympathy from my wife when I come home. Oh, you drank with a bunch of guys in a bar. It's like, boo-hoo. Like, yeah, I know. So, yeah, but again, boo-hoo, someone's got to do it. No, but there are not a lot. So basically, just like every farm operation would be, scale back in the off season, scale up in the on season. So the way that it works is we probably have across the entire farm, both farm hands, ice cream shop, farmers market, distillery, winery, office, the whole 9 yards. We're probably floating around 120 employees, I would say, both part-time and full-time. When we go to the on season, we'll probably hire upwards of 300, and that still won't be enough. But the thing is that eventually you'll get to a point where it doesn't matter if you have 3,000 employees, more employees aren't going to make the process quicker. So we really found that that's the sweet spot right there. Last year we ran the Census Bureau of how many people we were on foot traffic. And in foot traffic, we had just under 800,000 people on our farm. 300,000 of them came in the 6 weeks from late September into October. So the record was in a weekend, we had 17,000 people on a Saturday, and we thought we will never beat that. And then Sunday happened, and we had 22,500 people. So on that 24-hour span of time from business to business, we saw about just north of 40,000 people up here. It is absolutely wild. It's fun, but it's unlike anything. What I assume is it's very similar to track season for you guys up here. Whenever it comes up and Saratoga is wild with the racetrack, it's probably very similar to that. So it's one of those things that there will be a line of cars 2 miles down the street. It'll take 3 hours to get in here. That's how wild it is up there. So it was a great thing for COVID though, because you had to socially distance yourself. Why not do it on an 800-acre farm that you can still drink at? So it was a great time for it. But no, very big farm, not enough hands. It's the way the world works. And also people do get employed up there, and they don't realize no matter what aspect of the farm you're going to be in, there's always the farmer's mentality behind it. And that means hard work, dedication, and loyalty. So even if you're somewhere down on the very, very lowest part of the employee spectrum, or all the way up top, you're expected to do the same thing. And not everybody's qualified or wants to do that. That's perfectly okay, but it is definitely hard work. We wear many, many different hats. And for people like me, that's the best case scenario. If you always want to keep moving, I get to talk to people for a living. It's a great thing. So it's a fun time.
Very good at
What'd you guys? I'm sorry.
Very good at it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, we're gonna. Andrew's been talking for like an hour and 45 minutes now.
I know it's getting me to stop talking.
And he's already given me a new idea for the club.
Okay.
We're gonna have a branch, offshoot of the Saratoga Whiskey Club. It's gonna be called the Saratoga Gateway Club.
We don't need more gateways.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. No, but before we stop the recording, I just want to thank Andrew for being here tonight. I just want to push the stop button on here so I don't have to worry about these people online. But yeah, really, really awesome to have you here. We're so happy that this all coordinated with your portfolio tasting yesterday as well.
And it's funny because we didn't talk about this, but I knew that I got a call from Holly that said, "Hey, I want to come do a barrel pick," and I said, "Oh, great. Where are you from? New York? Oh, cool. Yeah, come on down." Then all of a sudden I get a call and they're saying like, hey, listen, there's a Skurnik wine event that's happening up in New York, up in Saratoga. I was like, oh, I've never been there before. That's cool. Went ahead and booked that. Well, then they come in here and halfway through the pick, I'm like, so you guys are from New York. And of course, when you hear people say I'm coming in from New York, obviously with my Southern Indiana mentality, I'm like, New York City. So I was like, where are you guys coming from? They're like, Saratoga. And I'm like, get out. I'm like, this couldn't have lined up any better. So I was like, as soon as I figured out I was going to that, I was telling them, I was like, we got to set something up. So I want to say a huge thank you to you guys. Thank you for hosting Starlight. Thank you for supporting the brand. Sarah, Jonathan, thank you so much for your all support. Thank you guys for coming out here. So we couldn't do what we do without you guys. So we really appreciate all of the love and all the support you guys bring us.
Yeah, so thanks, Andrew. We'll be around. He'll be here for questions. You want to come up? He's going to be signing bottles too.
I'd be more than happy to. Just know if you decide to sell them, it loses value.
Just whatever. So, all right, guys, we're going to stop the recording.
You gotta say a limited edition.
Yeah, not bad, right?
So do you have those available?
Are you talking about the double oak?
Yeah.
It was a distillery only release.
Yeah. It's like we went to Iowa. That's very cool.